Hi, I'm Chris Moniz, and I'm back to talk to you about Spanish notaries and why a notary works and why you need to use a notary. Spanish notaries, you need a notary. The purpose of the notary is to ensure that two parties who agree on a transaction sign any given document before the notary, and once that occurs, that becomes a bond to which then the agreement is established. So the notary is a legal person who gives fee to the transaction within an established legislative format. The notaries here in Spain do not speak English, and even those who do speak English request an interpreter when it comes to signing any given document. The person who fulfills that role as the interpreter will appear on the document which is being signed. So if it's a title deed for a property, an escritura, the person will appear on the back, on one of the sheets to the back of the document to indicate that there was an interpreter, and that the document was then translated to the language of the individual of origin, so that he or she knows what the document consisted of and why, and that they were in agreement to what was written in the document. If you're watching this and you've bought a property in Spain and you're thinking, well, I didn't have an interpreter, yes you did, and you would have as an obligation. So if you take a look at your title deed, you will find at the back there was an interpreter. So an interpreter is a must. Okay, it's a must when you do carry out any kind of notary transaction here in Spain if you do not speak Spanish. Okay, so it's a must. The notaries will only give fee to what's been agreed between the two parties, and therefore the notary will need the interpreter there to say, hey, this person didn't speak English, but this person had an interpreter, and therefore I, the notary, feel that the document was translated to the language of the individual or individuals before me, and that is the essence of the document, is to make sure that you understand and that you have taken full participation in that transaction, and the obligations that you have relating to that transaction, if it's a property purchase or indeed any other kind of legal transaction that you've taken and signed before the notary. So very important to have an interpreter, although you can have also a solicitor or a consultant or an advisor or anybody else that might be helping you with a transaction to be present, but the most important person in the room on the day needs to be an interpreter, because the interpreter will ask the questions that you feel you need to ask of the notary to ensure that perhaps some of the things that you need to know on the day are being asked and answered via the interpreter. So the important person in Spain, in terms of anyone who doesn't speak Spanish, is the interpreter. So that's a vital piece of information that you ought to be aware of and take note of. So the notaries are places where you sign documents. Okay. Wills. Many who come to Spain buy properties, buy cars, and forget to take a will, to make a will. And wills are they're not a legal requirement. It's not something that you must have because it's required legally to do so. It's more about leaving things, to leave a will, your last testament, the indications of your last wishes on paper, to how you wish to dispose of your estate here in Spain. And it will be far cheaper to have a will drawn up rather than not to have one, which will in fact cost your next of kin for far more money to then acquire your estate here in Spain. And now the wills are drafted in, or should be drafted in, double column. They can be drafted in Spanish and in English, or any other language other than English, if you're not an English speaker. So and the wills obviously then will carry out the details of the notary, where the will be drafted, the testating part, personal details, and then obviously the details of the individual or individuals, the next of kin, that the property is going to be left to and how it's going to be left. So vitally important to have that. Once you have a will, and upon obviously the demise of an individual, the will would just accelerate the process of the family or the next of kin of inheritance processes, and obviously that would obviously help a great deal. And obviously not to leave these kind of things also to the family, which obviously after death can be a rather complicated thing, and obviously people suffer when they lose a loved one. So no better way than to have a will, a testament left to make it easy for those relatives, and obviously make the process as simple as possible. So wills are not an obligation, but are strongly advisable to have. The other thing about the wills, which I'll quickly mention, is that when you draw up a will, inheritance law is based on the country that you originate from, the nationality that you hold. So if you're British, it'll be British law. If you're French, it'll be French law. If you're German, it'll be German law that will govern the inheritance proceedings. So also to bear in mind, it's not you need a Spanish will, but the Spanish will is just to process the estate. But how the estate is disposed of is governed by the legislation of the country of origin. So a good point also there to bear in mind. So 2 points there we've covered: the notary, and also the notary, and the wills. And the wills are also a document that we sign at the notary. So 2 points there to consider. Inheritancy. Inheritancy. Well, inheritancy is once again based on you having a will. Inheritancy means how your next of kin will inherit the property. Based on the person who you leave it to will depend on the taxes that you're going, the family members or persons mentioned will have to pay in inheritancy. And inheritancy tax in Spain is based on how far the person who's going to inherit is from you in terms of bloodline. So a wife or a husband will perhaps pay nothing or very little. The children then will pay obviously a higher percentage, etc., etc. So that taxation, inheritancy tax is based along those lines. And also, if you're registered and residing here in Spain, also that also will depend. That will depend also on the amount of inheritancy tax you will pay. Inheritancy also means you have to. A new document will have to be raised if there's a property involved. So a new title deed for a property would have to be raised to obviously then identify the new owners of the property on inheritancy, and this would then be called an inheritancy title deed, which would be the item. So inheritancy.